Daniel Harper stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of their Manhattan apartment, staring down at the glowing streets below. The city pulsed with life, 1,000 lights flickering in rhythm with the restless hum of traffic, but he felt strangely detached. Even the skyline, once a source of pride and excitement, now seemed like a distant photograph he could never touch. Clara was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the sofa, her laptop balanced on her knees. She didn't look up when he entered. She barely spoke. It had started subtly, almost imperceptibly, months ago. A missed glance here, a quiet sigh there. At first, Daniel brushed it off, blaming long work days and the stress of their professional lives. He traveled frequently for client meetings and marketing presentations. Clara had her career at a high-profile fashion magazine, and the long hours were supposed to be part of the modern marriage package. But lately, he couldn't ignore the tension winding itself through their home like an invisible thread. "Dinner's ready," Daniel said softly, setting the takeout boxes on the dining table. The smell of roasted chicken and vegetables filled the apartment, but there was no spark of acknowledgement from Clara. She continued typing, her fingers tapping rapidly, her eyes fixed on the screen, as if it contained all the answers to the questions he had not yet formulated. "Thanks," she muttered, without looking up, her voice flat. Daniel forced a smile and poured himself a glass of wine, a ritual he once enjoyed with her, now reduced to solitary comfort. He took a sip, letting the liquid warm him, and sat across from her. There was a subtle shift in the air, a weight of unspoken words. He remembered the evenings when they would talk for hours, sharing dreams, frustrations, and occasional laughter that left their stomachs aching. Now, even silence felt like a chasm between them, deep and unyielding. The first time he noticed it, he had dismissed it as exhaustion. Clara had been working late nights, her creative energy consumed by deadlines, but the more he observed, the more the pattern emerged. She was present physically, but absent emotionally. Conversations that once flowed naturally now felt like awkward negotiations. Daniel found himself hesitating, unsure whether to ask a question or to speak at all, because he never knew whether she would answer or turn away. One evening, he had tried to bridge the gap. He had approached her gently, placing a hand on her shoulder, and said, "Clara, is something wrong? Are we okay?" Her reaction had been a brief, almost imperceptible flinch, as if his touch carried a weight she could not bear. She had not raised her eyes to meet his. Instead, she whispered, "I'm fine," and returned to her laptop, leaving Daniel in the shadow of the apartment's muted lighting, feeling the first real pangs of helplessness. That night, sleep eluded him. He wandered through the apartment, pausing by their bedroom door, listening to the quiet hum of the city below. Every distant siren, every muffled conversation on the street felt amplified, a reminder that life was moving forward outside, but inside, something precious was slipping away. He thought about the early days of the relationship, the laughter in cafes, the spontaneous weekend trips, the quiet comfort of shared mornings. How had it all become so fragile, so precarious? Work offered no refuge. Daniel's marketing firm thrived, campaigns succeeded, clients praised him, but the victories felt hollow. Even the familiar glow of his laptop screen, once a source of purpose, now reflected only his growing anxiety. He checked his phone repeatedly, hoping for a message, a sign that Clara still wanted to connect, even in the smallest way. But the screen remained silent, a digital void echoing the emotional distance that had taken root. He tried other approaches, small gestures, leaving notes on her pillow, planning a weekend getaway, sending her favorite coffee in the mornings. Some days she acknowledged them with a polite smile or a soft "thank you," but the warmth that had once accompanied such gestures was gone. The more he pursued, the more he felt the resistance, subtle but insistent, as if she were erecting boundaries he had no permission to cross. Daniel began noticing the details he had once overlooked. The way Clara's laughter now seemed forced, the slight tightening of her jaw when he spoke, the way she lingered in the kitchen longer than necessary to avoid eye contact. He saw the small distances she placed between them, physical, emotional, invisible yet unmistakable.
And with each subtle rejection, his heart sank further, a slow erosion of certainty that left him exhausted and hollow. Late one evening, he stood again by the window, watching the city pulse beneath him. Clara was in the other room, her voice barely audible as she spoke into her headset. Words floated faintly: business meetings, deadlines, small talk with colleagues, but no mention of him. He realized, painfully, that he felt more like a roommate than a partner, and the intimacy they had cultivated over years was retreating into memory. He remembered a conversation with a friend who had warned him, "Sometimes love isn't enough when boundaries shift." At the time, Daniel had nodded, but not understood. Now, standing alone in the half-light of their apartment, he began to grasp the magnitude of what those words meant. Clara was not rejecting him out of malice. She was asserting control over her own space, her own time, her own emotional life. And for the first time, Daniel felt the vertigo of losing someone without an explicit betrayal, without a dramatic confrontation, simply through quiet withdrawal, a slow retreat that left him grasping at shadows. As the night deepened, Daniel realized that the challenge ahead was not about winning her back through gestures or persuasion. It was about understanding the chasm that had formed, confronting his own fears and insecurities, and preparing for the inevitable moment when the emotional distance would demand a reckoning. He did not yet know whether that moment would bring reconciliation or a heartbreak, but he sensed in the heavy silence that the equilibrium of their marriage had shifted irreversibly. The city outside continued to glow, indifferent and unyielding, a mirror to the distance between them. And Daniel, glass in hand, stood alone in the quiet apartment, confronting the truth he had long avoided. Sometimes the hardest battles are not fought in public, not declared in grand gestures, but in the invisible spaces between hearts where longing and fear intertwine.
The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, casting long stripes across the hardwood floor of the Harper apartment. Daniel stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee pot as if the answer to his growing unease might somehow be found in the dark liquid within. Clara was in the bedroom, her voice carrying faintly when she called out, "I'll be ready in 10 minutes." There was no warmth in the tone, no trace of the casual affection he had grown accustomed to. It wasn't just that she was distant, it was the intentionality behind it. Every word, every glance, or the lack thereof, felt calculated. Daniel had tried, as he always did, to bridge the silence, to reconnect through small gestures, a touch on her shoulder, a compliment, a question about her day. Each attempt seemed to fall flat, leaving him suspended in an invisible limbo where desire and frustration intertwined. By mid-afternoon, the tension became unbearable. They sat in their living room, a silent gulf stretching between them, as Daniel fiddled with his phone, scrolling through unread messages, while Clara organized files on her laptop. He finally spoke, his voice trembling with a mix of anxiety and longing. "Clara, can we talk?" She didn't look up immediately, her fingers paused above the keyboard, hovering like hesitant birds. Then, slowly, she tilted her head, eyes meeting his with a sharpness that made his chest tighten. "Talk about what?" she asked, her tone deceptively calm. "About us," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "I feel like we're drifting apart. I don't know what I did wrong, or if I did something at all. I just—" She held up a hand, cutting him off before he could continue. "Daniel," she said, and the single word carried the weight of steel. "Stop chasing me. I'll decide when we talk or spend time together." The words struck like a physical blow. Daniel's stomach lurched, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something deeper, an aching fear he couldn't name. He opened his mouth, but no words emerged. He wanted to protest, to plead, to argue that they could work through this, but the finality in her eyes froze him. Clara's gaze softened slightly, but only enough to show she had chosen boundaries, not cruelty. She continued, I'm not rejecting you because I don't love you. I'm just trying to protect myself, to have some control over my own life. You need to understand that. Daniel sank into the sofa, running his hands through his hair. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing inward as if to emphasize his helplessness. He wanted to ask questions to understand the reasoning behind her detachment, but he feared that any probing might push her further away. He had never felt so powerless, so acutely aware that love alone could not bridge the widening chasm between them. The day blurred into evening, and Daniel wandered through the apartment, unable to focus on work or television or anything that once brought him comfort. He kept replaying her words in his mind, dissecting them for hidden meaning. Stop chasing me. I'll decide. Each phrase was a gauntlet thrown at his feet, a challenge he wasn't sure he could meet.
He remembered the early days of their marriage when communication had been effortless, when a glance could convey volumes. Now, the simplest conversation felt like a negotiation, a minefield where one misstep could ignite resentment. The intimacy that had once been his refuge now seemed like an unreachable memory, a warm glow obscured by distance and deliberate silence. Later, in the quiet of their bedroom, Daniel found Clara sitting cross-legged on the bed, a book in her lap, her eyes distant. He approached cautiously, feeling the familiar tension coil in his chest. "Clara, I don't understand," he said softly. "I want to give you space if that's what you need, but I feel like I'm losing you, like I can't reach you anymore." She set the book aside, her expression unreadable. "I need space," she admitted. "Not because I don't care, but because I need to breathe. I need to know that I can exist outside of us for a while. You've always been relentless in your pursuit of closeness, and it's suffocating sometimes." Daniel's throat tightened. He had never considered that his devotion, his desire to nurture and connect, could be perceived as oppressive. Every night he had spent worrying about her, trying to anticipate her needs, attempting to fill gaps he hadn't even realized existed, had created an invisible cage around her. And now, she was gently but firmly showing him the bars. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the weight of realization pressing down on him. "I never wanted to hurt you," he whispered. I thought closeness was what you wanted, what we wanted." Clara reached out, resting a hand on his arm. The touch was brief, cautious, but it carried more truth than any words could convey. "It's not about wanting less, it's about needing more. More control over my own life, more space to understand myself. And you need to understand that I can't always meet your expectations. Not yet, maybe not ever." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of her words. He realized that the relationship was no longer defined solely by love or affection. It was now a complex interplay of autonomy, trust, and the delicate negotiation of boundaries. His instinct was to chase, to plead, to fix the distance, but he understood, painfully, that chasing would only push her further away. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in fragments. He thought of all the times he had tried to control outcomes, to mold reality into the version where they were inseparable, perfectly aligned. He thought of all the nights he had reached out, only to be met with silence. And he thought of Clara, sitting quietly across the room, holding her space with quiet determination, a reminder that love could not thrive in possession. By the early hours, Daniel understood the unspoken truth. The warning had been issued, not as punishment, but as a guide. Clara's words, "Stop chasing me, I'll decide when we talk or spend time together," were a line in the sand. Crossing it would break her trust. Respecting it might save them, or at least prevent irreparable damage. The lesson was bitter, almost unbearable, but clear. Sometimes love demands patience over pursuit, understanding over insistence, and courage over control. Outside, the city continued its relentless pulse, indifferent yet inspiring. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the first tremors of Resolute. He could not force connection, could not manufacture intimacy. All he could do was wait, observe, and prepare for the inevitable reckoning when clarity, honesty, and perhaps confrontation would define the future of their marriage. And somewhere, deep inside, beneath the hurt and confusion, a small spark of hope remained. Maybe space could heal. Maybe love could survive restraint. Maybe, if he learned the hard lesson of patience, they could find each other again. Not as captor and captive, but as partners who understood the fragile, intricate dance of boundaries, desire, and devotion.
Days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt heavier than the city's constant clamor outside. Daniel moved through the apartment as if traversing a foreign landscape, every familiar object a reminder of the subtle shifts between him and Clara. The sofa, where they once sat together, laughing, now held only her absence. The kitchen counter bore traces of breakfasts eaten alone. Even the sunlight filtering through the blinds seemed muted, a pale reflection of the warmth that once filled these rooms. Daniel had tried to respect her space, avoiding questions, keeping a careful distance, but the silence gnawed at him like an unseen predator. Every glance at his phone sparked hope for a message or a hint of connection, only to end in emptiness. The digital void became a mirror to the emotional distance that had taken root. Each unanswered text a quiet accusation, each delay a small fracture in his sense of stability. He found himself replaying past conversations, searching for the moment when the subtle cracks first appeared. He remembered a Friday evening when Clara had laughed at something trivial, yet her eyes held a shadow he hadn't noticed. He had attributed it to stress, deadlines, city fatigue, but now he questioned everything. Every memory, once comforting, now felt suspect, tinged with ambiguity. Had he misread her needs? Had he been too eager, too possessive, too blind? At work, Daniel's mind wandered constantly. Meetings became exercises in restraint. He nodded and contributed as required, but internally, he was elsewhere, calculating the distance, measuring the silence, trying to locate the invisible line that Clara had drawn. Emails piled up, deadlines loomed, but each success felt hollow. Even his promotion to senior director, an achievement that would have once sparked celebration, now seemed meaningless when compared to the widening chasm at home. He tried coping through small routines, early morning runs, late night reading, but none could anchor him. Every quiet evening returned him to the apartment, to the empty sofa, to the half-finished cups of coffee, and the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the air. He knew she was near, yet not present, a paradox that made his longing sharper, more acute. Clara, for her part, was no stranger to internal battles. She moved with deliberate calm, hiding the storm beneath a composed exterior. In her journal, she scribbled fragments of thoughts, reflections on autonomy and love, questioning the subtle ways in which desire, expectation, and fear intersected. She had loved Daniel truly and deeply, but the relentless pursuit, the constant striving for closeness had begun to feel suffocating. Space, she realized, was not rejection. It was preservation. It was a way to navigate her own emotions without sacrificing the connection entirely. Yet each attempt at distance brought its own guilt. Clara remembered their early days, the shared breakfasts on Sunday mornings, the spontaneous drives to the countryside, the quiet comfort of reading together in the evenings. Now, choosing distance felt like a betrayal, even if it was necessary. The emotional tug-of-war between longing and self-preservation left her exhausted, vulnerable in ways Daniel could not see. She feared that any misstep might shatter the fragile bond they still shared.
Daniel began noticing subtle signs of her internal struggle, the way her eyes lingered for a fraction of a second on his face before she looked away. the almost imperceptible hesitations when she spoke, the soft sighs she let escape in moments of solitude. Each gesture was a riddle, a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve, but every attempt at interpretation risked intrusion. The silent battles were mutual, waged in the shadows of unspoken words, in the pauses between sentences, in the spaces between heartbeats. One evening, Daniel lingered in the kitchen while Clara prepared dinner. He had intended to remain unobtrusive, but he felt compelled to break the quiet. "Clara," he said gently, "if you want space, I'll give it, but I can't stop thinking about us, about what's happening between us." She paused, turning the spatula in her hand slowly. "Daniel, you don't get it. Space isn't absence. It's not punishment. It's survival." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the tension she had tried to mask. "I need to understand myself, my choices, my boundaries. You've always been persistent. I can't breathe under that weight, no matter how much love it comes from." Her words cut deeper than any argument could have. Daniel wanted to argue, to justify his devotion, but he realized that any push now might undo months of careful restraint. He swallowed hard, nodding, even as his chest ached. Respecting her boundaries felt like stepping into the unknown, a test of patience he had never anticipated. That night, Daniel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as he listened to the city hum below. He tried to map his feelings: longing, fear, frustration, hope. He recognized the subtle shift in himself, how his love had become a quiet vigil, a patient observation rather than an active pursuit. He was learning to wait, to hold space for Clara, to wrestle with his own desire without imposing it. Clara, meanwhile, curled in her chair by the bedroom window, journal open, pen moving across the page in rapid strokes. She wrote about guilt, freedom, love, and fear, trying to untangle the web of emotions she had spun for herself. Every sentence was an act of self-preservation, a conscious effort to understand the choices she faced. She knew that Daniel's heart was inextricably linked to hers, but she needed clarity before she could decide whether to bridge the distance or maintain it. The silent battles stretched on for days, a tense equilibrium of presence and absence. Neither spoke of the undercurrents shaping their interactions. Both felt the invisible friction, the weight of unarticulated fears, the pull of unspoken desires. Every glance, every gesture, every careful step through the apartment was charged with significance. They existed side by side, yet apart. Two hearts engaged in a war fought not with words, but with patience, observation, and fragile trust. Daniel realized that the hardest part was not the silence itself, but the uncertainty it carried. The absence of overt conflict did not mean peace, it meant vigilance, constant awareness, and the unrelenting effort to navigate the delicate spaces Clara had created. Each small smile, each brief acknowledgement became a victory. Each misunderstanding, each perceived slight, a setback. He felt himself changing, learning restraint, learning the difficult art of loving without possession, of waiting without surrendering hope. By the end of the week, the apartment felt less like a battlefield and more like a mirror, reflecting their internal struggles, their desires, their fears, and the slow, deliberate process of redefining intimacy. Daniel understood that these silent battles were not to be won or lost, but to endured, respected, and learned from. In the quiet tension, he glimpsed the first faint outlines of possibility, that love, though challenged, might survive patience, understanding, and the courage to face one's own vulnerabilities.
It was a gray Thursday afternoon when Daniel first noticed the subtle changes that would unravel the fragile equilibrium of their home. The apartment felt quieter than usual, the hum of the city outside muted by the overcast sky. Clara was in the bedroom, speaking softly on her headset, the tone of her voice distant, measured. He had tried not to listen, telling himself that respecting her space meant avoiding intrusion.
yet a knot of unease tightened in his chest. Curiosity, however, has a way of defying reason. While Clara stepped into the bathroom to make a call, Daniel's gaze fell on her laptop, left open on the desk. He had never been one to invade her privacy. Trust had been a cornerstone of their marriage. But the subtle inconsistencies, the emotional distance, and her growing secrecy compelled him to act. Just a glance, he told himself, only enough to understand the widening chasm. The screen lit up his face with fragments of conversations he wasn't meant to see. Messages from unknown numbers, short, cryptic, emotionally charged. A series of late-night emails to a colleague full of confessions, laughter, and unfiltered thoughts. Even her social media, normally curated for public consumption, revealed hints of clandestine meetings, sudden disappearances, and an emotional life parallel to the one Daniel thought they shared. A part of him wanted to shut it all down, to pretend he had never seen anything. Another part, the more insidious, more desperate part, needed to know. Each line of text, each timestamp was a thread unraveling the tapestry of trust he had believed inviolable. He read in silence, heart pounding, mind spinning with a mixture of fear, anger, and heartbreak. By the time Clara returned, Daniel had convinced himself of nothing concrete, yet suspicion had taken root. Her casual greeting, the way she avoided his gaze, the almost imperceptible tension in her posture, everything now seemed loaded with hidden meaning. He tried to speak, to ask a neutral question about her day, but words failed him. The simple act of conversation now felt like crossing a minefield. One wrong step, one misplaced question could ignite a confrontation neither was ready for. The following evening, he observed her from the corner of the living room. She moved with a careful grace, her attention divided between emails, messages, and a book she had picked up to read. Occasionally, she would pause, stare out the window, and smile faintly, as if recalling a private joke or a memory he was not part of. Daniel's chest ached with longing. The realization was painful. Clara had a life unfolding right beside him, yet apart from him, a life filled with moments and connections he could not access. He began to notice other small signs, an unfamiliar perfume lingering on her clothes, receipts for restaurants he had never heard of, late-night calendar entries marked vaguely. Each discovery was a puzzle piece, each piece deepening the unease. The distance, he realized, was not merely emotional but also practical. She had created boundaries that extended into the physical spaces of their lives. That night, unable to sleep, Daniel replayed old conversations, searching for patterns he had missed. Every smile, every affectionate remark, every intimate moment suddenly seemed layered with ambiguity. He questioned his memory, his judgment, even the nature of love itself. Had he truly known her, or had he been constructing an illusion? A version of Clara filtered through hope and desire rather than reality. Meanwhile, Clara struggled with her own secrets. She had not intended for Daniel to discover anything, yet she understood deep down that the walls she had built were fragile. Each clandestine meeting, each private message was both an act of self-preservation and a moral compromise. She balanced her loyalty, her desires, and her fear of hurting Daniel like a tightrope walker suspended over a deep chasm. The knowledge that he might uncover the truth at any moment was a constant gnawing tension in her chest. Daniel's discovery led him to moments of quiet confrontation, though unspoken. He noticed her hesitations, the way she sometimes glanced toward him when he thought he was not paying attention. He noticed her subtle shifts in tone, a slight defensiveness masked beneath casual words. Each observation heightened his anxiety, his need to piece together the truth, yet he also recognized the delicate line between understanding and intrusion. One afternoon, Daniel found himself standing in front of a small pile of mail Clara had left unattended. A single envelope, partially obscured, caught his eye. The return address was unfamiliar. Hands trembling, he opened it. Inside were photographs of Clara at a small art exhibit accompanied by a man he did not recognize. They were laughing, leaning close together, unaware of the camera capturing their private moment. Daniel's heart sank. The images were not explicit betrayal, but the intimacy was undeniable.
The silent laughter, the subtle touches, the private world unfolding in front of his eyes, it was a revelation that pierced him more deeply than any confrontation could. The apartment felt suddenly oppressive, the walls closing in around him, the muted hum of the city below echoing his turmoil. That evening, Clara returned home, her expression calm, but the tension in the room was palpable. Daniel did not speak immediately, unsure of where to begin or how to frame the avalanche of emotions threatening to spill over. The weight of hidden truths, both discovered and suspected, hung between them like a storm cloud waiting to break. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, restrained, yet heavy with emotion. "Clara, I saw the photographs." She froze, setting her bag down slowly. Her eyes flicked toward him, a flash of apprehension quickly masked by practiced composure. You you shouldn't have," she whispered, a mix of reproach and regret in her tone. "I know, but I did. And now I don't know what to feel. Betrayal, confusion, anger, love. I don't even know if I can separate them anymore." Clara sank into the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Daniel, I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly. I needed to exist in ways that didn't revolve around us, even if only for a little while. I know it seems like secrets, but for me, it's about survival, my own mind, my own identity. I didn't think you'd see, and now that you have, I understand the pain." They sat in silence, the apartment filled with unspoken apologies, raw emotion, and the echoes of trust fractured but not entirely broken. The revelation of hidden truths had not destroyed their bond, but it had redefined it. Both understood that the road ahead would require honesty, courage, and a willingness to confront their own vulnerabilities. Daniel realized in that quiet, heavy moment that love was not simply a matter of proximity or transparency. It was about navigating the shadows, acknowledging the unspoken, and facing the truths that were often easier to ignore. Clara, meanwhile, recognized that boundaries, no matter how necessary, carried consequences, and that the delicate dance between autonomy and intimacy demanded careful, intentional steps. The apartment remained quiet, the city outside indifferent, and within the walls, two people confronted the fragile, complex reality of their marriage. Hidden truths had surfaced, and now the task was not to punish or retreat, but to understand, to forgive, and to consider whether the distance between them could ever truly be bridged.
The next morning, Manhattan was bathed in pale winter light, the streets below alive with the muted rhythm of rush-hour commuters. Daniel stood by the window, arms folded, jaw tight, replaying the images and conversations from the night before. His mind was a whirlpool of anger, hurt, and desperate longing. He knew a confrontation was inevitable. Avoiding it would only allow suspicion and resentment to fester. Clara emerged from the bedroom, her coat draped over one arm, hair loosely pinned back. She paused when she saw him, sensing the storm in his posture. "You wanted to talk?" she asked cautiously, her voice carrying a tentative softness that did little to ease the tension. "Yes," Daniel said, stepping away from the window and toward her. "We need to be honest, really honest. No more half-truths, no more hidden spaces between us." Clara nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the truth they both knew would hurt. She followed him to the living room, and for a few moments they just stood facing each other, the weight of weeks of silence pressing down like a heavy fog. Daniel's first words were not accusations, though the urge was strong. Instead, he spoke of his fear, the fear of losing her, of being left behind, of loving someone whose heart had become a private territory he could not access. "I've tried to respect your space," he said quietly, voice trembling. "But every day I feel you slipping further away. Every smile, every laugh I thought was for me, I'm afraid it isn't." Clara's eyes softened, reflecting the conflict within her. She had wanted space, yes, but she had never intended for it to feel like abandonment. She realized the depth of the pain her boundaries had caused. "Daniel, I didn't mean for you to feel abandoned. I needed distance, not to shut you out,
but to understand who I am outside of us. I didn't want our love to suffocate me or you. The words were an olive branch, but the underlying tension remained. Daniel felt both relief and frustration. Relief that her intentions were not malicious. Frustration that her choices had created an invisible battlefield between them. It's not just the distance, Clara. It's the secrets, the late-night messages, the photographs, the things I wasn't supposed to see. It feels like there's a part of your life where I'm not allowed, and it terrifies me. Clara flinched, but only slightly. I didn't want you to see, she admitted. Not because I wanted to betray you, but because I needed to have parts of myself untouched. Private moments aren't about dishonesty. They're about preserving a sense of self. I feared losing myself entirely in our marriage. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he ran them through his hair. But how do we reconcile that with love, with commitment, with everything we've built together? His voice rose, not in anger, but in raw anguish. I can't stand the thought of being shut out, of being kept at arm's length emotionally. It's killing me. Clara took a deep breath, her own emotions a tangled knot of guilt, love, and self-preservation. I understand, she said softly, and I know it's unfair. I should have been more transparent, should have explained why I needed space before it became this chasm between us. But understand this, my boundaries aren't a rejection of you. They're a plea to survive within myself so I can love you without losing me entirely.
The room fell silent, save for the distant hum of traffic. Both sat down on the sofa, facing each other, their hands occasionally brushing in small, tentative gestures of connection. The confrontation was not loud, nor filled with dramatic accusations. It was quiet, painstakingly honest, and emotionally raw. Daniel felt the enormity of what they were navigating. He realized that love, at this stage, was not about pursuit or possession. It was about understanding, patience, and accepting the imperfections of both partners. He understood the courage it took for Clara to assert her boundaries, and the vulnerability it took for him to voice his fears. I don't know if I can handle the uncertainty, Daniel admitted, voice low. But I want to try. I want to be patient if that's what's required. But I need to know that I'm not insignificant in your life. Clara reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. She said, "You're not insignificant. You're everything I value, everything I love. But love isn't just about proximity, it's about space, respect, and trust. I need to be honest about my needs, and you need to be honest about yours. Only then can we find balance." They sat together, hands clasped, processing the silent acknowledgement of each other's fears and desires. Daniel felt the weight of weeks of misunderstanding slowly lift, replaced with a fragile hope that honesty could mend what had frayed. Clara felt a sense of relief and anxiety intertwined, relief that he had confronted her without anger, anxiety about whether patience and understanding would be enough to sustain them. The confrontation revealed deeper truths than either had anticipated. Daniel recognized that love could coexist with boundaries, that vulnerability required courage on both sides, and that patience might be the bridge over the silent battles that had defined the past weeks. Clara acknowledged that transparency and shared struggles, even painful ones, were essential to maintaining intimacy. As the day faded into evening, the room filled with a quiet, reflective energy. The confrontation had not erased fear, anger, or uncertainty, but it had illuminated the path forward. Both understood that reconciliation would require effort, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to navigating the delicate interplay between personal autonomy and mutual love. Outside, the city lights flickered, a steady pulse beneath the apartment windows. Inside, Daniel and Clara remained on the sofa, hands intertwined, hearts cautiously aligning. The confrontation had stripped away illusions, but it had also revealed the resilience of their bond, the ability to face hidden truths, articulate pain, and commit, however tentatively, to understanding one another. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel both the weight and the relief of truth. Clara rested her head lightly against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and intimacy forged through honesty. In the silence that followed, both recognized the difficult, fragile, yet enduring nature of love, a love tested by boundaries,
by secrets, and by the courage to confront what was hidden in the shadows.
The city was quieter that Saturday morning, a soft haze covering the streets as sunlight struggled to pierce the early fog. Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. The confrontation from the night before lingered in his mind, not as a resolution, but as a mirror reflecting his own insecurities, fears, and desires. He traced the rim of the mug absent-mindedly, thinking about Clara, about them, about everything that had shifted between them in the past weeks. He realized that reflection was unavoidable. Each silent glance, each hesitant touch, each boundary Clara had set forced him to examine not only her choices, but his own behavior, his expectations, and his definitions of love. Was love possession, closeness, constant reassurance, or was it patience, understanding, and the capacity to let someone exist fully, even when it meant moments of separation? Daniel's thoughts drifted to the earliest days of their marriage. He remembered Clara laughing in the rain after an unexpected downpour, the way her eyes sparkled with delight. He remembered quiet mornings over pancakes, the gentle brush of her hand across his shoulder, the intimacy of shared glances during late-night movies. Back then, love had been simple, unquestioned. But simplicity, he now realized, had been an illusion, a fragile veneer over the complexities of desire, autonomy, and human need. Clara entered the kitchen quietly, moving with a softness that had once been routine, but now carried layers of meaning. Daniel looked up, offering a small smile, which she returned with a cautious warmth. They did not speak immediately, allowing the silence to stretch, comfortable in its restraint. "You're up early," Clara said, finally, her voice subdued but steady. "I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about everything. About us, about space, about trust." Clara nodded, sliding a chair beside him. She said, "I've been thinking too. About the ways I have pulled away. About how I may have made you feel abandoned. I didn't intend it, but intention doesn't erase impact." The admission struck Daniel with its honesty. He realized that reflection was not only about his own failures or fears, it was also about understanding Clara's perspective, her internal struggles, and the courage it took for her to confront her own needs. Love, he saw, required empathy beyond his own desires. He set his mug down, leaning forward slightly. He said, "I see that now. I was so focused on holding on to you, on chasing closeness, that I never considered that you might need space to breathe. I thought love meant constant presence, constant reassurance. I see now that it's more complicated than that." Clara reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "It is," she agreed. "And it's not just about space or closeness. It's about balance, about understanding when to step forward and when to step back. I'm learning that too." Daniel reflected on the hidden truths, the photographs, the late-night messages, and the silent battles. Each memory, once a source of jealousy or confusion, now served as a lesson in patience and observation. He understood that love was not a series of grand gestures or declarations, but a continuous negotiation of boundaries, desires, and vulnerabilities.
He also reflected on the confrontation, the anger, the fear, the hurt. It had been necessary, a release valve for weeks of pent-up emotion. Yet in that moment of tension, they had also glimpsed the resilience of their bond. Confrontation, Daniel realized, was not only about exposing truths, but about creating space for understanding, acknowledgement, and growth. Clara spoke again, her tone contemplative. "I think the hardest part," she said softly, "is facing ourselves honestly, recognizing our needs, our fears, our mistakes. It's easier to hide behind routine, to pretend that everything is fine. But when we confront the truth, it's terrifying and necessary." Daniel nodded, the weight of recognition settling over him. He thought about the nights he had spent awake, consumed by worry, replaying every interaction, analyzing every glance. Now he saw those moments not as weakness, but as preparation, an emotional rehearsal for the patience, empathy, and self-awareness required to sustain their marriage. He remembered small moments from the confrontation, subtle gestures and expressions that revealed vulnerability beneath composed facades. Clara's hand on his arm, the slight quiver in her voice, the tentative way she met his gaze. These had been signs of trust, even amidst fear. Daniel understood that reflection was not only about considering the past, but about interpreting the present, recognizing the silent signals that spoke volumes without words. By mid-morning, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of coffee and a quiet understanding. They had not resolved everything. Distance, boundaries, and hidden fears still lingered, but reflection had created a foundation. Both recognized the need for ongoing patience, for careful listening, and for the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Daniel's mind wandered to the future. He wondered whether their love could endure the tension between autonomy and intimacy, whether silent battles could be mitigated through empathy, whether boundaries could coexist with passion. For the first time in weeks, he felt a cautious optimism, a tentative belief that love might survive the trials they were navigating. Clara's eyes met his, and in that quiet moment, words were unnecessary. The shared silence, the mutual understanding, and the unspoken acknowledgement of vulnerability conveyed more than any declaration could. Reflection had illuminated the path forward, not easy, not without struggle, but present, possible, and real. As the city hummed below, Daniel and Clara sat together, absorbing the weight of their own introspection. Reflection had revealed both fragility and resilience, fear and hope, distance and connection. They understood that the road ahead would require continued honesty, empathy, and patience, but also that their bond, tested and strained, was capable of growth and transformation. Daniel finally spoke, his voice gentle. "I don't have all the answers, Clara. I don't know how to navigate everything perfectly, but I want to try with you." Clara's hand found his again, their fingers interlacing. "And I want to try too, even if it means confronting fears. Even if it means admitting mistakes. Love isn't perfect, Daniel, but it's worth the effort." The morning stretched on, filled with quiet reflection, shared presence, and the fragile hope of reconciliation. In the subtlety of their gestures, the acknowledgement of past missteps, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths, they discovered a new depth to their connection, a connection forged not in denial or avoidance, but in the deliberate act of understanding, forgiving, and choosing to continue together.
The following week arrived with a crispness that made every breath feel sharp and deliberate. Daniel had spent countless hours reflecting on their past, their confrontations, and the hidden truths they had unearthed. Clara, too, moved through her days with a quiet vigilance, aware of the delicate balance she was maintaining between autonomy and intimacy. Both knew that the next step would demand a choice, one that could define the trajectory of their marriage, for better or worse. The decision weighed heavily on Daniel's mind that Thursday evening. He had taken a long walk through Central Park, observing the interplay of light and shadow among the skeletal trees, the muted rustle of leaves underfoot, and the distant hum of the city. He reflected on the confrontation, the silent battles, the revelations, and the reflection that had followed. Each step seemed to echo a question. Should he fight for every fragment of closeness, risking resentment and suffocation, or should he honor her need for space, embracing uncertainty for the sake of her well-being? Back in their apartment, Clara had prepared a simple dinner, the aroma of roasted vegetables and fresh bread filling the kitchen. She moved with a grace that belied her internal tension, setting the table with quiet intention. She had wrestled with her own choice, whether to embrace the connection Daniel offered fully, allowing vulnerability to replace guardedness, or to retreat further, preserving the fragile sense of self she had fought to maintain. When Daniel arrived, she was seated at the table, the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle shadows across her face. He paused at the doorway, taking in the scene, the intimacy of the domestic ritual contrasting with the tension that lingered in the air. He realized in that moment that love was not merely a matter of presence, but of deliberate, conscious choice. Every gesture, every decision carried weight. "Dinner's ready," Clara said softly, her voice steady but carrying a hint of apprehension. Daniel nodded, stepping forward to sit across from her. Neither spoke immediately, the silence charged with anticipation.
The unspoken question hung between them. How do we reconcile love and space, trust and doubt, closeness and autonomy? Finally, Daniel broke the quiet. Clara, I've thought about everything. Your need for space, the distance, the secrets I discovered, and I've realized I can't control your choices and I can't force closeness, but I can choose how I respond. I can choose patience, empathy, and understanding. Clara's eyes softened, reflecting a mixture of relief and uncertainty. And I've realized the same, she admitted. I've been afraid that if I opened myself fully, I'd lose my sense of self. But hiding, distancing, it hurts you, and it hurts us. I need to decide whether to embrace vulnerability or continue protecting myself. Daniel leaned forward, voice earnest. I don't expect perfection, Clara. I don't expect every moment to be easy, but I want to choose us, fully, with all the uncertainty, all the risk, all the fear. I want to try. Clara reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Then I choose us too, she said softly, a fragile smile forming. Even if it's difficult, even if we stumble, even if fear and doubt don't disappear overnight. The choice was not dramatic or loud. It did not come with declarations or grand gestures. It was quiet, deliberate, a mutual acknowledgement that love was an active decision rather than a passive state. Both understood that this choice would demand patience, empathy, and continuous communication, a commitment to navigate the complexities of modern life, personal boundaries, and emotional honesty.
As they shared the simple meal, conversation flowed gently, touching on trivial matters and gradually moving toward deeper reflections. Daniel spoke of his own insecurities, acknowledging the ways he had chased closeness at the expense of empathy. Clara shared her fears of losing autonomy and her struggle to reconcile personal identity with partnership. Each admission was a bridge, narrowing the distance that had stretched between them. After dinner, they moved to the living room, settling on the sofa. Daniel's hand found Clara's, fingers intertwining naturally. They did not speak for long moments, absorbing the significance of their choice, the weight of the decision that had transformed silent tension into tentative connection. You know, Daniel said finally, voice low, choosing doesn't erase the past. We can't undo mistakes or unsee things, but it does give us a chance to move forward, together, consciously, intentionally. Clara nodded, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. And it reminds us that love is a continuous act, not a feeling that comes and goes, but a decision we make every day to understand, to forgive, to endure, and to connect. The evening unfolded in quiet intimacy, punctuated by small gestures, a shared glance, a soft touch, the warmth of proximity. Each moment reinforced their choice, demonstrating that even amidst uncertainty and past hurt, love could persist when nurtured with patience, understanding, and deliberate attention. Later, Daniel stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. Clara joined him silently, leaning against his side. They watched together not as separate individuals navigating conflict, but as partners who had chosen each other despite complexity and fear. In the reflection of the glass, they saw not perfection, but resilience, not certainty, but hope. The choice they had made was not a conclusion, but a beginning. A commitment to navigate challenges, to confront hidden truths, and to honor both closeness and distance, and to embrace the fragile, beautiful reality of love that required constant effort and courage. Clara whispered, almost to herself, "This is our choice, Daniel, to keep choosing, every day." Daniel nodded, a quiet smile forming. "Every day," he echoed, feeling a weight lift, replaced by the quiet strength of mutual resolve. The night settled over the apartment, and with it came a profound stillness. Neither knew exactly what the future would hold, but both understood the power of choice, the ability to confront fear, embrace vulnerability, and commit fully despite the uncertainties and hidden battles that life inevitably presented. In that stillness, Daniel and Clara recognized the transformative nature of conscious decision.
the courage inherent in choosing love despite imperfection, and the subtle, enduring truth that connection was built not merely on presence, but on the deliberate, continuous choice to navigate life's complexities together.
The first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting soft lines across the living room where Daniel and Clara sat side by side. For the first time in weeks, the apartment felt calm, not silent, not empty, but alive with the tentative warmth of reconciliation. The tension that had defined the past months had softened, replaced by a fragile but real sense of understanding. Daniel sipped his coffee, eyes fixed on the steam curling upward, while Clara leaned back, arms wrapped around her knees, her gaze distant but steady. There was a comfort in the shared quiet, a recognition that sometimes words were insufficient to express the depth of reconciliation. They had confronted fears, revealed hidden truths, and made deliberate choices. But now came the quieter, ongoing work, living those choices every day. Do you think, Clara began, her voice hesitant, that we can really move past all of it? The secrets, the distance, the fear? Daniel looked at her, searching for any trace of doubt. He found none, only the remnants of vulnerability that had always made her human, real, and profoundly alive. I think, he said slowly, that moving past it isn't about forgetting. It's about understanding, about learning how to navigate the spaces between us, the hidden corners of our lives, without letting them define or divide us. Clara nodded, exhaling softly. It feels like we've been walking on ice, she said, every step uncertain, every movement cautious. But now it's like we've found the rhythm. Tentative maybe, but real. Daniel reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, a gesture that spoke of intimacy, rebuilt through honesty and patience. Love isn't perfect, Clara, but it's persistent. It's in the small moments, the quiet mornings, the shared coffee, the decisions we make to understand rather than accuse, to forgive rather than retreat. They fell into a companionable silence, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The distance that once felt insurmountable was now navigable. The hidden truth that had caused pain had become lessons in empathy, boundaries, and the complexity of human desire. The confrontations, both spoken and silent, had forged a path toward awareness and mutual respect. Clara's mind wandered to her own revelations, the realization that autonomy did not necessitate isolation, that vulnerability could coexist with strength, and that love, when chosen deliberately, could withstand the trials of secrecy, distance, and fear. She recognized that Daniel's persistence had not been about control, but about devotion, and that her need for space was not betrayal, but self-preservation. The balance, she now understood, was delicate but attainable. Daniel in turn reflected on his own growth. He had learned that patience was not passive, it was active, requiring empathy, observation, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths within both himself and Clara. The chase, the fear of abandonment, the obsession with closeness, all of it had been a reflection of his own insecurities. Now, he realized, the true act of love was choosing presence without possession, connection without suffocation.
As the morning unfolded, they began to speak more openly about the future. Small gestures of trust returned, shared planning for the week, discussions about boundaries, and honest reflections on emotional needs. They laughed together quietly, the sound tentative at first, but growing in warmth and familiarity. It was not the easy laughter of ignorance, but the resilient laughter of two people who had endured trials and emerged with deeper understanding. By midday, they decided to take a walk through the city, letting the rhythm of life outside echo the internal shifts they had experienced. The streets, alive with pedestrians, cafes, and traffic, felt expansive, a metaphor for the possibilities that now lay ahead. Hand in hand, they navigated the bustling avenues,
aware of the fragility of trust, but committed to nurturing it with conscious effort. At a small park bench overlooking a fountain, Clara stopped, turning to face Daniel fully. "I know we'll have difficult days," she said softly, "moments when old fears or doubts resurface, but I also know that we've built a foundation, one of honesty, choice, and understanding. That matters more than perfection." Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of relief and determination. "We'll stumble," he admitted, "but every step we take together strengthens the bond. It's not about avoiding mistakes, it's about choosing to stay, to engage, to love despite them." They sat in silence for a moment, watching water arc gracefully from the fountain, the sunlight catching droplets like fleeting diamonds. In that simple observation, they found metaphorical resonance, the unpredictability of life, the beauty in imperfection, the persistence of connection despite turbulence. Returning to their apartment, they settled into a quiet evening routine. Dinner was simple, conversation light, but meaningful. The shadows of past conflicts lingered, but they no longer dominated the space. Instead, the apartment was filled with cautious optimism, the sense that the difficult work of love was ongoing, deliberate, and shared. Later, as night fell, they stood by the window, city lights stretching endlessly before them. Daniel wrapped his arm around Clara, her head resting against his chest. Neither spoke immediately, content to let the moment exist without articulation. The resolution was not an end, but a beginning, an opportunity to live consciously, to choose empathy, to navigate boundaries, and to embrace vulnerability without fear. "I don't know what the future will bring," Clara whispered finally, her voice barely audible over the hum of the city. Daniel kissed the top of her head lightly. "Neither do I," he replied, "but I know we'll face it together. That's enough." In the stillness, they found solace, courage, and the quiet power of commitment. Resolution was not about erasing the past or pretending pain did not exist. It was about acknowledging every fracture, every hidden truth, and every challenge, and choosing to move forward, hand in hand. As they prepared for bed, Daniel and Clara shared a final glance, a silent affirmation of mutual respect, love, and the deliberate choice to continue their journey together. The night wrapped around the apartment like a protective cocoon, shielding the fragile hope they had cultivated. In that quiet space, both understood the profound truth that love is not static, not simple, and not guaranteed. It is a series of choices, a continuous engagement with vulnerability, and a deliberate commitment to understanding one another despite distance, fear, or hidden truths. In choosing to remain present, to forgive, and to engage honestly, they embraced the possibility of new beginnings, both for themselves and for the fragile, beautiful bond that had endured.